the purpose of these interviews is to do a couple of things. We're trying to find brilliant people like yourself who are doing and thinking interesting stuff related to the transformation that higher education is undergoing right now under a few different developments. One of the big developments is obviously COVID-19, the pandemic, and the other is the, for lack of a better word, the Black Lives Matter protests against police violence and racial inequity in the United States. So our plan is to ask people like yourself a series of questions. And we have a battery of identical questions for everyone to answer, so we can have that as a baseline. But then along the way, we can also let the conversation go in a few places depending on your particular interests and your concerns. If that makes sense, if that works for you.
It works, and it sounds great.
Very good. And then if you could please introduce yourself.
Of course, my name is Isis Artze-Vega, and I'm the Vice President for Academic Affairs at Valencia College in Central Florida.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Well, the questions are largely big picture questions, very large scale. And the first one I'd like to begin with is looking at higher education right now in 2020. What are you seeing? What are your observations of the landscape at the big level?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and I'm seeing so much. I'm also noticing, Brian, a lot of differences by sector. And so most of my experiences that I'll speak to are my current sector, which is the community college, right? And I was in a university setting before this, so I might add a little bit of that, but mostly I will speak from where I am. And for the last year and a bit, I have been at a fantastic community college, Valencia College in Central Florida. Some of the changes that I'm seeing, maybe one of the most pronounced one is an action orientation and a hastening of our pace. And that I would say is notably different from, right, we do have a reputation for being very slow to change. And that certainly has not been true in our recent past. The stakes were high and we had no choice. But what we acted, we transformed many of our institutions and many of our systems and structures. And so I'm seeing that be sustained, that action orientation and that momentum. I'm seeing it continue and persist. And I wonder how long it will persist, but I am certainly noticing that. In the area of the kind of second major societal, happening, which I, to your point, it's hard to know how to refer to it. I sometimes say this is the time when more people noticed how we treat Blacks in our country, right? Not that this hasn't been happening forever, but this new attention and kind of awareness or awakening moment. I see much more. I see much more action orientation around issues of equity and justice than I've seen in a while. We've paid it lip service for a really long time, but right now I'm seeing things with much more detail and much more likelihood of advancing racial equity in our institutions than I have seen in a long time. So that makes me cautiously optimistic as somebody who has been working very intentionally to advance equity for a really long time. I'm seeing the kinds of things I've been really waiting and wanting to see. In the area of equity, I'll just say one other thing that I'm noticing is we are being explicit around racial equity in a way that we dared not use the term racial equity explicitly. Many of us, even those of us who were in the work, were kind of tiptoeing around the issue of race. And I see us acknowledging now, and with great thanks due to the Black Lives Matter movement, to say, yes, we should think about equity in its broadest conception, and also we must think about racial equity in particular because of the history of race in this country and because racism permeates so many of our systems, including our institutions of higher learning.
Thank you. That's very, very solid. Let me take two steps back. You mentioned that there were differences by sector and that you spoke beautifully from the community college perspective, especially the one from the institution where you are. But do you see any changes in other sectors of higher education in terms of, say, state universities, liberal arts colleges, Research One universities, and so on?
I do, and I am a longtime student of enrollment management. And so what I see is I see institutions that were really struggling to develop revenue models that work, already working really hard to implement kind of tuition-based incentives and tuition discounting in a way that was bordering on irresponsible and not giving themselves a robust safety net for times of economic trouble. And here they came. So I am deeply concerned because I think, like many, I consider the number and the diversity of our institutions of higher learning to be one of the hallmarks and the points of pride of our U.S. system of higher learning, right? The different types of institutions, and even the number, right, as key to access and to equity. So as the numbers of institutions that can survive this moment seem to be, that I'm worried. I'm worried about how many institutions will survive this, just from a financial perspective, and I feel it. I feel it in my heart, and I'm worried about the sector. We don't have very many residential students. Actually, we opened our first dorms last year that we share with the University of Central Florida. But I'm also, I'm also deeply feeling for my colleagues trying to navigate that, and the fact that a residential experience right now, if we were trying to address those issues on top of everything else, this would be even a harder moment for us. The way that we are framing this is, as we must, aligned with our mission. We have a mission centric reason for increasing access and making sure that I'm partnering with my colleagues so that everybody who is facing unemployment and underemployment in our region can come to Valencia, should they choose. And that is hard. It's a different kind of challenge than imagining bringing students together physically right now in large numbers. And so that is what we know our colleagues are facing right now, while they also are trying to act on their deep commitment to equity, right? And seizing this moment and this momentum. So it's a lot. It's a lot that we're all trying to accomplish right now.
Let me rephrase it. It sounds like residential campuses, or campuses with a higher proportion of students who are residential, seem to be more vulnerable than those that are not.
Yeah, and making really hard decisions right now around safety, and not simply around access and learning that are different from the challenges that we're facing in our sector.
Thank you. I'm taking notes on this for my own purposes. So if you see my fingers going like this, or you hear clacking, that's I want to make sure that I can think about this clearly. Let me add the second question to this then, which is, as you're looking at these dynamics of rapid change, including the reaction to COVID, the reaction to Black Lives Matter, the increased action orientation, as well as looking broadly at higher education, seeing problems with tuition discounting and residential life, what trends or what metrics do you track, or would you advise us to track?
Good question. I don't have good metrics for the revenue side of the house, though I'm thinking right now that you would, if you were interested in that and you were trying to study how institutions survive, then you would be hoping that they're strategizing in a very focused way around their revenue models, right? So I would want to track those and see some creative thinking there around that work. I'm also thinking that many of the metrics that I think tell us the story and are associated with these trends, we have always had. We haven't paid a lot of attention to them. We haven't made them public, and we certainly haven't disaggregated and made those data public. So as pertains to our goals around racial equity, how powerful, not that just some individuals in IR or in the top floor know that we have an equity gap when we look at our numbers, but that we say that publicly, we commit to changing it, and then we track progress along those lines, so that we don't see differences in student performance on retention, on graduation, on some of those key metrics that we already track. We want to see the differences based on students' background characteristics become more and more narrow over time. And I want us to be more visible around that, to hold our, as part of the accountability us holding ourselves accountable and also saying to our stakeholders, this is important to us, please hold us accountable for making progress here as well. A couple of other metrics that come to mind in this area and around the area of equity is around the most visible sector, right? The most elite institutions in our country. They enroll a small number, right? And a small proportion of the total population of college students, right? We know that. And yet they're the most visible. And they continue to be, and certainly in the public's mind, the point of reference for colleges and universities and for our sector. And it is also the case that they have the kinds of resources that it takes for students to be successful. So I would want to continue to track what proportion of students from historically underserved groups are attending these institutions, and I want to see more progress. We see a little progress, but the numbers are pretty flat over time in general. So I would want to see some significant changes in there if we're committed to equity and doing our part in equity as a sector. The last set of metrics are a riskier one, but I think crucial, and those are metrics around learning. Learning has been really elusive, and yet how can we continue to say, trust us, we're a really good investment, if we don't begin to work much harder to say, and this is what you get out of it other than a credential or general employment. What did you learn to do? What do you now know or can do better? So I hope that we move in that direction as well.
This is fantastic, and it's like you were waiting all day to answer this question. There's just, let me ask two clarifying questions. First, when you're talking about retention and graduation data by background, that's for student success. Actually, that's not a question. That's just, I got it. Okay. But when it comes to learning, any directions that we should be headed in? I mean, for example, should we be looking at standardized test results on things like either certificate exams or national or international standards bodies for chemistry, for example? Should we be looking at test scores within classes? Should we be looking at grades? Should we be looking at some of the different kind of big exams like NESE or GRE, or what would you think?
I mean, the little that we've experimented with the tests doesn't seem too promising. So that people are quick to reject them, both internally and externally. Our grades suffer from the bad measurement. So we know that our grades can mean almost anything. They're really hard to associate with learning, so not them. That some of the work in portfolios and authentic assessments and kind of where students leave with artifacts that are emblematic of learning of X and Y. Some of the badging work might have promise in that area, right? I know how to do this. Some of those licensure exams that you referenced or more discipline-based exams, I think have some promise. And again, I don't come to this with an answer. I come to it with a hope and a sense of responsibility. I think we owe our community and the general public more thinking. And I work with brilliant people every day. So I know if this is something that we determine that we want to do, that we will absolutely find a way to do it well. Again, I don't come with an answer. I come with a hope.
That's good hope. Thank you. Thank you. Well, these are big questions, but I want to zoom out a little bit further. And we're talking about the year 2020, which is, so far an annus mirabilis or annus horribilis, depending on how you look at it. But it's, but let's look a little further out. If we imagine the long-term change that might follow as a result of how higher education responds this year, do you see any longer-term changes to either your campus or to higher education more broadly?
I think a couple of things are definitely going to stay with us, and maybe the one that will stay with us the most, certainly us, will be a bigger slant toward online learning and toward mixed mode learning as well. I think that because of the population we serve and the flexibility afforded by online, that even those students who were hesitant and who would not have opted for it now have had a taste of it and will stay, not because they like it better or they love it, but rather because it allows them to live their very complex lives. And so I do think that that's one thing that will stay. We have, how many thousands of faculty who now, right, who said, I would never do it. I'd rather retire than teach online, who taught
Right.
online. So I can see that persisting in across the country is more faculty saying, okay, well, now that I have this course designed and it affords them some flexibility as well. So I think that's one that will persist. I hope that this momentum that I'm seeing and the action orientation that I'm seeing around racial equity will manifest itself in curricular changes, and those tend to last. So those are the changes that I like to see, right? If we work with one person and their course, but if we can channel this energy and to say, do our students see themselves in what they read, in their assignments? Do they have an opportunity to use their experiences and to bring their many strengths and assets to bear on their learning, and we can infuse that in the curriculum, then we know that curriculum tends to last. So I'm hopeful there. I'm also seeing importantly and attention toward more inclusive hiring practices, and we know that faculty also stay if they are hired and if they are treated well and find themselves in a place that respects them and their many strengths as well. So I hope that then those, right, because those are the kinds of changes that stick around.
They really do. If I can ask, and if you can't answer now, I completely understand. Those are great answers, by the way, and they continue to give me hope about the slant towards mixed mode learning and teaching online. Looking to the next academic year at your institution, do you think most faculty are going to want to teach mostly online, or are they going to want to teach mostly in person? How do you think that's going to play out? Again, if it's too sensitive or if it's too early, you don't have to say.
No, thank you for that, though. I think we have a mix at this point, right? And every day the health and the safety prospects change, and our faculty, right, like all of us, not only are worried about their own health, but the health of their loved ones and the ones they come into contact with. So I do know of our faculty who love teaching online and prefer it and think that more learning happens or deeper learning happens with face-to-face contact, and yet we'll be choosing in the short term to teach online, in order to keep themselves and their loved ones safe. And I do think that we will need to respond to both the faculty interest and preference, and also remember that we're here for our students, and spend some more time really understanding where students are on the other side of this in terms of their availability. Our students, many of them work hourly jobs with schedules that change, for example. And so it's really hard to argue that we need to have more or as many even face-to-face classes that don't offer any flexibility or as much flexibility, right? We can embed some in our pedagogy. And so I do think this will stay with us. We were already committed to doing that research on our students and developing an online strategy. I see this shift being sustained, and many of our faculty embracing it. Certainly not, Brian, where we are in the fall, which is mostly about a 90% online. I don't see that, and I don't know that I would be in favor of it. I don't think we've done our due diligence in really differentiating the learning that happens and the acculturation that happens. We know that the college degree represents a variety of changes and developmental processes in students, and I don't know yet whether I'm ready to say that it's equivalent. We have made some significant progress in terms of course level performance outcomes, but those don't tell the whole story. And so what do we owe our students? Why are they coming to college? And how do we craft that experience to the best of our abilities, with online being one of the variables, but certainly not the only one.
Oh, that makes all kinds of sense. You mentioned the changing nature of the health environment. I was just reading about a couple of sports leagues that had decided to hold their August practice in Florida. But they made that decision, I think, in April, when it seemed a lot less insane to do that. But I love what you just said, that connects back as well to our question about metrics and tracking learning. But let me push the long-term changes as well to a different question. How do you see long-term changes intersecting with other larger developments or forces? When we came up with this question, we were thinking of climate change to pick one, which I know is a vital issue for Florida. But so if you want to speak to climate change or any other really big trend or force that you think impacts higher education.
It's hard to think of a longer term big trend that doesn't intersect with this moment, and right with these with again with what we are challenged with right now. One small connection to climate change, and I would say that like so many other things, COVID-19 just put this. I keep picturing a spotlight moving, right? Because these things were already there, and COVID either put a spotlight on them, or they were or they floated up to the top, and we were noticing them in a time that we didn't notice them. So some of those remarkable images around what happens when we don't fly and we don't drive, and these beautiful bodies of water that we can now see through, right, is such a tangible reminder of the impact that we are having, and that we do have the power to pause or to delay the damage that we're doing to the earth, right? So again, it has been had such a powerful spotlight effect. We are dealing with poverty across the globe, right? And so COVID has again done the same thing, turned its attention and said, you knew you had poverty, but did you know that it was this pronounced? You have inequities, and yet did you know that there were some people who don't have access to Wi-Fi, right? Because for so many of us who are making decisions, that seems like saying you don't have water, which also some people don't have. So I would just say the globalization, right? We had never seen our interconnectedness. It became even more pronounced. It was put into bold relief. Like, we are all connected to one another. There's a reason this pandemic took the kind of shape and scope that it took, because we are so connected.
Yes.
So it's hard for me to narrow down what to connect this to, because it really has been all encompassing.
It really is. But I love the way that you take that back and forth from poverty and inequities to globalization to how this makes us rethink climate change. One philosopher of science was saying that he thinks, I'm not sure if he hopes, that our response to COVID is a kind of dry run for our response to climate change.
I hope so too.
On my good days, I hope so. But you said something very, very powerful about this that I was really struck by, and it leads me to another question, which is, you asked about, or you mentioned that this reveals poverty, this reveals inequities in all kinds of ways. I'm wondering what else has this crisis revealed about higher education, especially things that we don't normally say or aren't quite so visible.
I started us off here, but I'll say just explicitly this time, it told us that we are a lot more nimble than we thought we were, and that other people thought we were, right? Like, we took our campuses from one, right, a complete way of operating into another. It was inconceivable. If you had asked this as a thought question, I think my colleagues across the country would have said, no, I don't want to think about that. That's not something we could do, and we did it. So we learned that about ourselves. One of my colleagues, Brian Dewsbury, articulated this other thought that strikes me in response to your question, and is that when we remembered what was essential and when we acted, we focused on teaching. And for so long, we have neglected teaching in many parts of our systems and our decision making, and yet we closed a lot of the labs and the research, right? And we said teaching must continue. And so this was a powerful reminder that no matter what institutional type we are, we held on to teaching for a reason, and we remembered that was a key part of our responsibility, and of why we exist as institutions of higher learning. And so how do we hold on to that? How many of us had invested deeply in our faculty and in teaching? And I am at an institution that absolutely had done that, and thank goodness. because it made it possible for us to support our students through that transition. Our faculty supported one another. They had been training and learning together with our teaching and learning team on how to teach online, right? But that salience of teaching, I think, is something that we learned. What do we do with it? We also realized that we hadn't prepared many of our faculty in a lot of things, not just online learning, right? Which was that one area right now in instructional design. But many of our faculty, as we know, continue not to receive any formal training or education in learning science, in memory and course design and in assessment design. And so I hope that we hold on to that as well. We noticed it now because we know that so many of those competencies are integral to good instructional design and to teaching online. So we noticed that. And again, the inequities existed everywhere. They became more visible to us, how much inequity and how much our students are challenged with as they engage with our institutions. To think that our students were riding buses and relying on us exclusively for online access, or to borrow our computers and our technology, and to say, I don't have access to a technological tool with which to learn. We heard it now. It became concrete in a way that we knew it, but we cannot ignore it now. It again came to us so tangibly.
Well, that's beautifully said. I love the balance in what you said too, how we realized that teaching was the essential core of higher education, even while we closed labs. But at the same time, we realized that faculty need help with learning science and course design. Thank you. This is a great revelatory moment. Those are great revelatory answers.
I'll say something else, Bryan, and I wouldn't call it revelatory, but I think we learned that many of us can work from home and work remotely, and that we can do a lot of our jobs. And many organizations in higher ed and out of higher ed had been thinking about this, right? How to be more flexible in terms of hours and afford our colleagues flexibility in working from here or from there, and can we really trust them, and will work really get done? And we have evidence of that. We have evidence that many of us can work. We've also, to go back to the question of climate change, we have reduced our carbon footprint significantly as we don't get stuck in traffic and spend all of those hours there.
Right.
So maybe we hold on to that. I think it has certainly caused our human resources organizational development team to think about what is the nature of work post this moment, and will it fundamentally transform the way that we do the work of leading an institution of higher learning, of supporting students. We moved all of our tutoring online, for example, and we will right now have to think, how do we do this work that is a combination of what we used to do, what we did in response to COVID, and where is what did we learn from this so that we can sustain the very best version, which is what our students deserve, of course.
Quite. Well, it's quite true. Remote working can be done, but also at this, I love how you push this. This makes us rethink, what is the nature of our work? How should we change? Well, let me zero in a little bit on a different part of the whole topic, and ask, what about the profession? Let's just call it the profession for right now, just to put a box around it. I'm thinking of instructional design. I'm thinking of academic technologists, academic computing specialists, but so not, somewhere between not faculty and not IT backend, but the people who really help shape course design. It may be that instructional design is where all of that funnels into, but that particular profession, that part of higher ed, what can they contribute to higher education's transformation in this crisis?
Well, I think first we have to acknowledge how much they have contributed. I just got the chills when I saw articles and social media posts of people saying, "Did you know there's this team of people and they're called instructional designers and they're awesome and they're going to save us?" And I thought, well, number one, I can't believe that you work there and don't know. Okay, that's okay. You know, because mostly I was just thinking, hallelujah, right? So many faculty realized that there was a center for teaching, right? So not just instructional design, but did you know there are people who know about teaching and learning and can support us? So that was wonderful. And let's acknowledge that so many faculty developers and instructional designers were the superheroes of that transitional moment, and even now in getting ready for fall. So let's name that and kind of celebrate it first. I would say that there's such an enormous possibility in instructional design in particular, because many faculty, as we know, right, we're the experts, and we know, and we like knowing, and we like to approach things from a position of knowledge and expertise. Okay, comes with the territory. In the area of instructional design and of technology, I have found, right, that the guard is down, that the defensiveness is low, because faculty don't expect themselves to know technology. It's okay not to know because I didn't learn it, because it's newer. And so now there's an in. There's a metaphor of a loose brick from a book that I called Just Listen. And the metaphor is like, how do you make contact with someone and get them to listen? And that is, you find that one loose brick that lets you in. And I find that technology is such a good way in to connect with faculty, because they didn't have to know about it. So it's okay for them to admit not knowing, right? And IDs have that as part of their job. So they're in, right? They're in, they have that contact. And right now, attention is heightened, and that's another in. That's another kind of piece of, attention is something we want to kind of leverage. We know it's so powerful for learning. So you have IDs, you have this opportunity to partner with faculty, and there's no part of teaching and learning that doesn't connect to instructional design. So once you're in, then you can, like all faculty support work, develop a relationship based on trust and respect and partnership, I would say. And then you have an opportunity to ask questions around assessment and share your knowledge around assessment design, not limited to the technological component, but around authentic assessments, for example, and kind of push the ideas coming out of the teaching and learning world, and kind of share them. And it really, I have seen it work really remarkably well for faculty to come in thinking that they're going to experience something highly technical, and then through that embrace the broader teaching and learning literature and opportunities. Equity-minded practice has so much to do with transparency and scaffolding, which are deeply connected to instructional design. So I really would just not, I see there's no limit to the impact that an instructional designer can have in partnership with faculty to advance almost any goals that we want to realize in our students through faculty. It's a great, they're great partners.
Thank you. That's a fantastic answer. I'm sure that people listening will be very heartened by this. And to begin, I want to agree to acknowledge the mighty contributions of this population. I mean, that's just almost completely invisible in the discussion about what happened, but my gosh, what a tremendous act of heroism.
Yes, heroism is exactly it.
We have two more questions left. I want to make sure we get into them because I want to be very careful with your time. So thank you for that answer. Let me advance to the next question, which zeroes in on a different topic. And I'm really, really curious to hear what you think about this from your perspective, which is, there's been a bunch of skepticism about the relevance of science, and it comes out in different ways during this year. What does that suggest about how academic research messages are crafted, or how we can achieve some kind of persuasion?
Good question, Brian. First, I want to say that I wouldn't necessarily connect those two as tightly as you have connected them in that question, right? I think we have the skepticism around science, and we have scientists communicating about their research and their work, and maybe they're related, but again, I wouldn't put them so closely together. One, I will say to the efficacy of how scientists are communicating, I want to say I don't blame my colleagues and I don't blame the scientists. They work in systems and tenure systems and that are requiring them to publish, and not just publish, but publish a lot and publish in specific periodicals that nobody has access to but one another. And I say that as somebody who has left a university to a library with less funding, and even I can't access it. So I, as somebody who really enjoy peer-reviewed literature, and I count myself in the very small percentage of people in this country who do, and even I can't read the research findings as in the primary sources in which our colleagues are publishing, right? So they're inaccessible. They are written with jargon for the most part. We don't teach one another how to write for external audiences. And that's what they're needing to do to survive and to keep their job. So no blame here for our colleagues. Is it precisely the system that we designed for them? You know, how far back did the Boyer report come out urging us to depict a broader, to have this broader conception of what scholarship is, and to say, what if they engage in this kind of research around their teaching and whether their students learn? You have the Boyer report on your.
I really do, actually. I was just, we just moved, so I had a whole bunch of books, but I was just looking at this from a box.
Right, like if you wanted it to be accessible and you wanted it to make a difference in public life and in how the community perceives our sector and the relevance of, right, of what we do, then you wouldn't do what we do in our systems. You wouldn't. I think about my colleagues, the humanists, who still had to get their book published, even though they said that that was not the best way to get those ideas out or to accomplish their goals, and they still had to make that happen, right? So, you know, I would say that the science skepticism, the reason that I would separate them a little, or on the one hand, I think that we really should disrupt the system and have our brilliant scientists sharing their work more broadly in ways that are accessible to the general public, and the kind of older notions of the public intellectual. I wish we would revive them. I have some colleagues who still try to live into that and write op-eds for the local newspaper and be interviewed by the local media and work really hard to make their language accessible. But I don't see nearly enough of that, I would say. The general skepticism, I think right now is so politicized. And the reason that then I disassociate it from the research is that I think that when the major source appears to be partisanship, then I wouldn't address it with something like more accessible communications. I just don't think that it would make a dent right now.
Oh, that's a great. I love how you pry the question apart, and that makes a lot of sense. If we have time, I might want to circle back to this because I have a couple of follow-up questions, but I want to make sure we get in our last big question. And it's one that you started already addressing, which is to ask if you could speak to the digital divide, you know, how you're seeing it. I mean, you already mentioned when we're talking about what the pandemic and Black Lives Matter revealed. You said it revealed the role of bad connectivity, that was a serious problem, which I agree with. You know, how else are you seeing this play out? What else can higher education do to help ameliorate it?
The digital divide, you're right. I would put it in that list of what has been highlighted by COVID, right? It again was less visible and has become so pronounced. I was thinking about the digital divide in drawing a parallel to the sentiment that some people will share. Well, college, it's not really for everyone. And you say, well, what about your kids? Oh yeah, no, they're definitely for them, but maybe not for other people's kids. And I thought of that because again, how inconceivable would it be for so many of our leaders, decision makers, business leaders to think that anyone would not have access to technology or to Wi-Fi. Certainly, they will I don't know people who even vacation somewhere where they don't have access for that temporarily. And others of us who really want less connectivity when we're on vacation so we can actually take a break. And so I would say that on the bright side, right, if there can be a bright side, is that the how essential connectivity is. Learning was fundamentally stopped. I mean, not fundamentally, it was stopped. It was paralyzed for some of the most vulnerable populations across our country. They could no longer learn because the ways that we, right, could sustain learning were so dependent on technology that there was no backup plan, right? And it is ubiquitous. Those of us, right, for whom it is ubiquitous, I hope that at least it was a really powerful and helpful reminder that that is not true for so many individuals. And I think of it as a responsibility, not of higher ed, but of our country and our leadership at all levels, to reconcile these gaps immediately, right? We're continuing to build with the presumption that people have access to technology. We're building on really faulty ground.
Well said. Very, very well said. That makes all kinds of sense. Here, yeah, absolutely. Do you can I ask, how do you see this play out in your community? I mean, that is, before COVID, were you seeing some of your learners really relying on Starbucks, McDonald's, public libraries, and since then, you know, how has your campus responded to this gap?
We found out that they were relying on us, and some of our faculty, some of our part-time faculty, not just our students, were relying on us for the quality connectivity that it takes to learn, right? So there's do you have it or not? And then there is it of sufficient quality? We have purchased many laptops and developed a system for distributing them to our students. And then when they ran out, we bought some more. And again, come from a privileged position, right, to be able to have done that we had the funding and that we could allocate it. You know, tried to do some creative thinking in terms of our Wi-Fi and like some institutions, whether we could point it outward so that students could access it via our parking lots, but that didn't bear fruit. So we were able to make some progress and make some purchases and loan out technology that we had already purchased and that was living in our physical locations. Some really good creative thinking, but I don't want to pretend that we have solutions. I think we have named it as something that we need to pay more attention to and dedicate more resources to.
Well, thank you. That's a great answer. I'm hearing from community college faculty and staff around the country about how many students are primarily interacting with a class via cell phone, which is very creative and has possibilities, but is often very problematic depending on the content of the software. This is, Isis, we've covered a whole range of topics here. And I'm wondering what, with all these ideas bubbling in our heads right now, what would you like to expand on, or what would you like to add to all of this? Is there a question that we should have asked that we didn't, or is there a topic you want to address that we haven't yet?
I think that the one thing that I would expand on is associated with the question of equity and kind of sustaining our momentum and our energy around being a more just society and being more just and equity focused institutions. And that is the reminder that so much of what we do is, permeated with and has evidence of this deficit mindedness. Our default is to notice how when our students don't know this or don't have enough of that or should have known this or weren't prepared academically. If we pay more attention, we will notice that is everywhere. And so I would say that an extension of that equity-minded commitment and that racial equity is to not only remind ourselves that our students come in with enormous talents, abilities, and skills and assets, but also to leverage them, to devise not just equity-minded, but asset-based pedagogical practices where students can bring those strengths whether they are linguistic or navigational or
Mhm. Mhm.
all of the above, bring them into our institutions and use their strengths as part of their experiences. We still ask them to leave themselves at the door and then to acclimate to us, to assimilate to us, and to become more and more like us to be successful. I think
Mhm.
we're missing out on their enormous talents. And so I would just hope that we would spend more time thinking about what it looks like to be intentionally asset based, in all the ways that we engage with our students in and out of the classroom.
Beautiful, beautiful. I think I can hear some Paulo Freire in that. Um, that's well, this is an incredibly rich harvest of a conversation. Thank you so much for your time today. This has just been terrific. I really appreciate it, and I'm really looking forward to uh, hearing the conversations that follow when everybody else gets to hear your words as well. Thank you so much.
It was my pleasure.